Hi, and welcome to this episode of Museum Monday on Viking.TV. I'm Ellen Marie Næss. I'm museum lecturer here at the Viking Ship Museum in Oslo. And today I'm going to invite you in to have a little special tour to talk about my own special topic, the Oseberg ship, of course, the two ladies who were buried in it, and then what this amazing burial and the ship tells us about the Viking cosmology, their beliefs, the way they handled their loved ones, and in general, their thoughts. And that's where we want to go. That's the interesting part of the history. So welcome, join me. The best way for traveling in the Viking period in Scandinavia was by boat. It was a lot of water, seawater and freshwater lakes. So naturally, this idea of traveling in real life, when the Vikings died, they thought that they were going to travel somewhere, and the only way to travel was by boat. So travel from the living to the dead was also a journey that could easily, or at least logical, be done by boat. For the top people in society, this way of traveling to the kingdom of death, they wanted that to look spectacular, and they were buried in vessels or ships like that. For more normal people, they were buried in smaller boats. And for those poorest people in society, they didn't even get that. They got a hole in the ground. So there was a big difference on status, also in the way that you took your last journey from the living to the dead. So all the ships in this museum, we have 3, they has been used as sailing ships, and then they were reused as burial ship for important members of the society. One of those ships in the mythology is a ship that has to do with Ragnarok, which is the event when the world ends. And this ship is a ship that was built by the nails of the dead persons, and it's going to be used for the evil forces to be transported across the sea and to the last battlefield. On this last battlefield, they will meet the gods, the good forces, and the evil and the bad forces will fight each other, and they will lose, and the whole thing will end in fire. And luckily for us, just want to mention that, the world is going to wake again as new. But this ship, since it was built by the nails of the dead ones, it was pretty important for the Vikings to cut those nails of those people who died. If not, the ship Naglafar, meaning the nail traveler, if they didn't cut the nails, this ship would grow too fast, and they didn't want that. So it's logical and easy to understand that since the Viking ships were so important in the life of the Vikings, they also had a part in the belief and the cosmology as the natural way of traveling. So this ship was placed in a grave with 2 dead women inside, and it was ready to travel to the kingdom of death and bring the 2 deceased women safely there. But not so. Since this ship was firmly moored from the stern with a thick rope, and this rope went through the ground twice around a huge boulder and held this ship in the grave. And the reason for that, we do not know. It's a mystery. And I must say, I love a good mystery in the archaeology, but still there are some explanations. Perhaps one or both of those 2 ladies had a religious role, and in the real life, they could have some part of a shaman role, and they were traveling as a shaman, which meant that they were leaving the bodies and the soul were traveling. And in this phase of traveling, it was important that the soul could find back to the body. And in this situation, of course, obviously, you can't have a body on a ship and it disappear, and the soul come back searching for the body and it's not there. That's a problem. Perhaps that's the explanation for this. We don't know, but I think it might give some sense. So those two ladies, they're so intriguing. I would like to invite you to go and meet them in person. Follow me. So here we are, visiting the two ladies who were buried in the Oseberg ship. The younger one, she was around 60 when she died. It's a decent age in the Viking period. But the older one managed to be almost 80. So they're two, let's say, good adult women. And we do not know if they were related in any way. They might have been mother and daughter. We do not know yet, working on that. But I think that both of them were high members of the society. We know that the older one had cancer in the last stadium, so she probably died of that. But of course, we can never be completely 100% sure, but because even if you have a deadly disease, you can die of something else. And that brings us to the question about who was the main person in this grave, and we do not know. It could be the older one, it can be the younger one, and it is possible that not the main person has been killed, has been offered to follow the first one in the grave. It's possible. The Vikings did commit human sacrifice, and especially in a burial among top society like this, it was important to show the gods and the living what kind of level we were on. It was a very special situation. And it was not only a possible human sacrifice in this burial, there were also a lot of animals who were killed, offered, and put into the grave. Human sacrifices are also mentioned in some written sources. And we have the author Snorre, who lived in Iceland a couple of hundred years after the Viking period, and he wrote down stories about the kings and the Vikings and also of the mythology. It's a wonderful source for us, even though it's written quite a while after it happened. So he mentions human sacrifices in the sagas of the Norwegian kings. There are some situations were so special and that they need a really sacrifice. And then they needed the king to offer himself or to even offer him his son. So an offering on this level obviously claims as a member of the top society. Human sacrifices are also a part in the myth about the gods. And the chief god, the main god, Odin, he also offered himself to himself. He hung himself in a tree for 9 days and 9 nights, and as a result, he got wisdom. So it was an offering, but he got a very important skill afterwards, this amazing wisdom and his ability to understand what was going on in the world, was, of course, important for the humans. The Oseberg burial were also the last resting place for a lot of animals. There were animals offered to follow the two ladies in the grave, and there were 6 dogs. You can see the dog chains and a dog collar here. There were 2 cows, and there were 15 horses. That's a lot of horses. Some of them were hit in the head with an axe or something similar, and others had their head cut off. This is a riding saddle, probably used by one of the ladies. One of my favorite, this beautiful ornamented riding whip. And then there is a very interesting detail. The funeral happened in late summer, and even in Scandinavia, late summer is still green. There is no frost or snow. but these horses still have spikes in the hooves. So the horses were prepared for a travel on icy and slippery roads. Why is that? I think the explanation is that in the Viking cosmology, the Viking belief, they had several places where the dead went when they died. They had Valhalla, which is known for all the popular culture, all the films, that brave warriors went to Odin in Valhalla. But perhaps the most important place for the dead to go for the most people was Hel. And that's where we have the word Hel. Hel is a person. It was a daughter of Loki, and is also the place. This daughter, when she was little, the gods understood that she and her brothers, the Midgardsorm and the Fenriswolf, they were up to no good. So they placed the three siblings somewhere safe. So the little girl Hel, she grew up as the empress in the kingdom of death. She received all the dead souls. And her kingdom, Hel, was cold. And it's described as a cold place, and the road towards Hel is icy, and it goes in the direction of north. So when you go to Hel, you will travel north and down on slippery roads. So I think the horses were really prepared to take the two ladies and themselves to Hel. This wagon was a part of the grave gifts that were put into the grave with the two women. And as you can see, this is not a wagon meant for everyday use for average people. This is a luxury wagon for two prominent ladies. And they used it for showing off, telling everyone how important they were. And the ornamentation on this grave would give people some hints of the roles of those two ladies. Behind on the wagon, there are cats. And you can't have a wagon pulled by cats, it doesn't work. But you can have a wagon pulled by horses with ornamentation and cats on it. And the reason for this, cats could have a connection with the role of those two ladies. If one or both of them had a role as some kind of a priester for the fertility goddess Freya. This fertility goddess was in an agrar society, of course, important. It has to do with wealth, that things were growing, that people had enough food, so it was crucial. So this goddess, she had in the myth a wagon, and this wagon was pulled by cats. And she traveled like that on her journeys. For example, there is a story how she searched for her husband riding around the world in this wagon pulled by cats. Wagons has other roles in the myths as well, and perhaps more known than the wagon of the fertility goddess Freya is the wagon of the thunder god Thor. He had a wagon pulled by goats, and he sometimes liked to travel across the sky in his wagon, and he was hitting in there with his hammer. And the wheels and the hammer made the thunder and the lightning. So when the Vikings heard the thunder and the weather was bad, they knew that Thor was on tour in his wagon. However, here on the other side of the wagon, there is a picture, a scene that we not fully understand. It's a picture of three persons, a man holding a knife in one hand and a horse in another. There is a woman holding his hand with a knife, perhaps preventing him from using it, I don't know. And there is a person riding the horse. This is a scene so clear that it absolutely must have given some meaning to the Vikings. It's a story, they knew this story. We've lost it. So we don't understand what the meaning behind this scene. It must have been something important. If not, they wouldn't have put so much effort in making this scene. Also on the wagon, there are some men heads, and some of them are really well groomed. It's showing the opposite of some of this popular culture, not groomed men with hair all over the place. It shows a well-groomed man taking care of his beard and his hair and his look. Just look at this. In the popular culture, in the films and games and movies, we very often get an impression of a quite simple Viking male most of the time, fighting all the time, eating, drinking, being happy. But through this archaeological material, we get a glimpse of a Viking culture much more sophisticated than that. And they had a belief system, a cosmology, much complicated, and they put their actions into this system. And through these archaeological sources, we can get a meaning of it. So, for example, a funeral like the Oseberg, in this situation of a funeral, the Vikings would understand or believe that this funeral opened the gates towards the world of the dead. And in this world of the dead ones, there were evil and dangerous forces, and the living needed to protect themselves towards that. And some of the ornamented figures in the grave might be interpreted as protectors. Like this one, it's my favorite. It's called academic since it's a bit strict in the shape and ornamentation. But he and 4 other heads were put in the grave, 4 of them, making a square around the bed where the 2 dead people were laying, and they might have been protected, not the deceased ones, but the living ones, against those forces who were moving around in this funeral situation. And this and other examples shows us a very interesting way of looking at the world. And that's the whole thing with history and archaeology. We are searching for the human beings. We are searching for the way people have been handling their life and their world, and to see what we can use and what we can learn from the history. Thank you for joining me so far. I'm really looking forward to your questions for the Q&A session, and I will do my very best to answer them. In the meantime, while you are preparing and sending in your questions, we will send a 5-minute documentary on the tapestry that was found in the Oseberg burial. We made this documentary in a cooperation between the museum and Viking a couple of years ago, and it brings up this theme about the mythology and how it's reflected in the different material in this amazing burial. Thank you, and see you in 5 minutes.
Høvdingers bragder var i bildene våre. Fyrsters hærmenn i hamarbeidet.
Disse tekstilfragmentene her var en gang praktgjenstander. Men etter over 1000 år i jorden er de i dårlig forfatning. Dette her, det er et av de best bevarte fragmentene. Dette kan være et gravfølge, eller kanskje en myte. Her sånn så ser vi antydning til 3 kvinner, og det kan vi se på kjolene deres. Denne vognen her, det ble funnet i Oseberggraven. Det kan være at det er en sånn de har prøvd å fremstille. Dessverre så har de fleste fargene forsvunnet, men rødfargen har altså gått. Tråden ble farget med det man fant i naturen, og for rød så kunne man bruke roten av planten krabb. Billedvevene var statusgjenstander som kunne henges opp i hallen. Noen av tekstilbitene er fulle av referanser til vold, og kanskje viser de til et virkelig slag eller til en myte om et slag. Her ser vi en underlig figur med paralleller langt tilbake i tid, og over ham så ser vi en kriger i bjørneham. Er han en berserk? Øverst ser vi kvinnelige krigere med skjold og spyd.
Oppsatt står veven, stålgrå av spyd.
Det var kvinnene som sto for vevingen. De vevde det de så, og det de så for seg. Billedvevene er et vindu inn i fortiden.
3 røtter gror til 3 kanter. Fra asken Yggdrasil. Jeg vet at jeg hang i det vindkalde treet. 9 hele netter med odd i såret. Til Odin gitt, sjøl til meg sjøl. I det treet som ingen vet av hvilke røtter det rant.
And hi and welcome back. My name is Ellen Marie Næss, and I will do my very best to try to answer your questions. And I have got a few very good ones. And we will start with one from David D. Pavin, United States. He asked if the cultural and religious philosophy of modern Norway is closer to that of the Norwegian National Lutheran Church or that of the spiritual perspective of the ancient Vikings. Yeah, it's a huge question. But the Christianity has played a very important role in the Norwegian culture for more than 1,000 years, and clearly it builds up the background for the way of the way of living and philosophy of the modern Norwegian people today. So I think I must say that it's closer to the Lutheran thoughts. And then there is Sherry Sita, also from the United States. She wants to say thank you to Viking.TV and all the other scholars for awakening my interest in discovering my heritage. That's nice. And she wants to know if I can suggest further reading about the sagas for beginners. She knows about Snorri Sturlason's works, but are there other key authors or editors? And Snorri Sturlason is the Icelandic historian and writer. He wrote down his books a couple of years after the Viking period, and it is the main written source to the mythology. So that's the thing you should read if you want to go into this as close as you can get without reading runes or Norse. But in addition to that, I think you should have a look into the Danish historian he called himself Saxo Grammaticus. He lived 1200 and something in Denmark, and he wrote down some other sagas and myths. So there are some stories in his works that are not in those of Snorri. So you should look into that as well. And then I have a personal little recommendation. I think there is an American author called Neil Gaiman. And if you haven't read that, you're in for a treat. He had rewrote the stories of Snorri in a very nice way. So I would recommend that as well. And then Tina Monkton, also from United States, wants to know, how does the Viking Ship Museum take jurisdiction when ship remains are discovered on private property? And in Norway, the rules are like that. If there are anything older than 1537 Reformation in Norway, things older than that, cultural heritage, belongs to the state, if it's on private property or not. And then the museum, university museums will take care of them, of the items afterwards, or if they are dug up. And then we have Malika from Palmyra. And thank you so much for this presentation. You're welcome. Hope you liked it. And she has a very good question. When officially was the end of the Viking Age? I hear so many different ages. And that's right. When you look that up in a book or internet or something, you will have a lot of different options for the beginning and the end of the Viking period. And the Vikings themselves, they didn't think that they were living in a period that had a beginning and an end. So those years are put upon it later by scholars or by people who want to systemize the history. So actually, you can choose one more or less. I would say that the Viking period starts around 750 and it ends 1066 with the Battle of Stamford Bridge in England. That's my personal favorites. And I think 1066 is after that. The situation back in Scandinavia has changed. We have the national states, we have a change in religion into the Christianity, and the whole society is something else than when the Viking period starts in 750. So, and Janet from San Francisco, she wants to know if there are any, oh yeah, I lost the question. She wants to know if there are any runes in the Viking ship graves. And yes, there are. There are a couple in the Gokstad grave on a bronze bucket. But then there is a very interesting one in the Oseberg ship. And if the interpretation of that is correct, it says something like, man knows little. And that's so beautiful and philosophical. I hope it's correct. It's sometimes difficult to read and interpret runes. So we are not 100% sure. And then, yeah, Betty, she has a very tricky question. During what period or time range was human sacrifice practiced? And did the practice come to the Vikings from other cultures they had contact with? Human sacrifice, probably it was done even before the Viking period. And people do contact each other, but if this is something that they have picked up like that, I don't think so. I think that's something that has been going on for a while in Scandinavia, even before the Viking period. And then Hank from San Diego wants to know if there has been discovered any Viking graves outside what we know as Scandinavian today. And yes, there are some Viking graves outside Scandinavia today. Since the Vikings were traveling a lot, they were also settling down and they died where they lived. So there are graves with Scandinavian jewelry and weapons in all the areas where the Viking traveled, in the British Isles, in Ukraine, in France. So there are quite a few. And then we have Roberta from Flagstaff. She wants to know, she says that one of the tapestries had a swastika. What did it represent in Viking society? And would it have come from trade with Eastern culture? The swastika was a part of the Viking ornamentation, and it is an international symbol of eternity. So this is also something that an idea of a symbolism that have spread where people traveled and met. So the Vikings used it, but originally it came from somewhere in the area around India. So there is a swastika on a couple, actually, on the textiles, and there is one of a bucket, and there is one of the tent poles in the Oseberg grave. Then we have Scott without a last name. He just wants to say thank you. And thank you, Scott. That was nice. Oj, ska vi se. I have to read those. Then Trudy von Huntley. She says, where are you based in Oslo? I've been to Oslo twice, but never heard of the Viking Ship Museum. When I next come back, I will definitely come and visit. Thank you so much for this informative presentation. You absolutely has to come and visit us. The Museum of Cultural History in Oslo has two buildings. There's one in the city center, and there we have an exhibition with some of the most famous Viking artifacts. It's a very nice exhibition. It's called Viking simply, and it was really worth a visit. And the Viking Ship Museum is placed a bit just outside Oslo. It's not far. However, we are closing the Viking Ship Museum because we are building a new one at the same spot, and we will have the Viking ship, but we will also, in addition to that, have an exhibition, will have room enough for all other items from the Viking period, and we have room enough to take care of the Viking ships in a proper way. And we will tell the whole complete story of the Vikings, not only the story of the richest one who got graves like the Oseberg grave. I'm really looking forward to the opening of that museum in 2025-26, and I hope to see some of you there. And then we have Sarah from Sun Valley. She again wants, when and why did the Viking Age end? And again, it ended somewhere year 1066, and it ended because the society in Scandinavia changed. At the beginning of the Viking period, the national states in Scandinavia didn't exist. There were smaller kingdoms fighting for the power, and they had this Norse belief and the belief system. And when the Viking period ended, we had developed a system of national states with as kingdoms, and religion had changed, and the way of behavior or looking at the whole world had changed. So you could say that the Viking period actually more or less just faded out. And then I think we have Ted from Cambridge in United Kingdom. Why do you think the Vikings went down? Oh, it's jumping a bit. Why do you think the Vikings went down in history with such notoriety when the Kalaman was a contemporary and incredible, cruel and violent? Yeah, it's difficult to say, but it was the Viking period was a violent and cruel period in Europe. So the difference with the Vikings were that they were actually coming from outside, and written sources, or the people who could write at that time, were not Vikings themselves. So they're describing the Vikings as something often terrifying coming from outside. And back home, like the Calamans, really there were not anything better. So if you were a poor farmer at that time, you needed to take care from a lot of people. It was not a nice time to be poor and unprotected. And Mona want to know, is there an artifact that is special to you? I'd like to know what you feel is most important and symbolic to Viking history. I have some favorites, a lot, but the one topping my top 10 list must be the whole Oseberg grave. The whole complex is so special, and it is a never-ending story of humans living in a period so far away, but yet through this grave we get some information about them. We get a glimpse into their lives. So if perhaps it's cheating, but I will say the whole complex, Oseberg complex, is my favorite. Camilla from New York in the United States, she asks, what would you say are some of the most significant design influences from the Vikings? Yeah, I don't know. There is a lot, and of Viking designs. Perhaps the most famous one are the ornamentation with the snakes and the animals crawling into each other. But that is, for a modern eye, perhaps slightly too much. So the Scandinavian design today is quite simple, and I don't know anyone who would like to decorate their homes with a lot of snakes and animals. But so then again, perhaps some of these more simple lines from the ships are those who have survived until today. That's a guessing. I'm not a designer, but there's something there. And then we have, I think we're getting to the end of the questions today, but we have one from Jaylene Ranoki. We want to know, when did Scandinavia break up into individual kingdoms or country? Why and when did Norway gain its independence? That's it's a long story. Since I have said that the Scandinavian national states they are born at the end during the Viking period, and they're there when the Viking period ends. And then there are some years during the medieval, but and we were together with the Danes and together with the Swedes. And after the Napoleon War, we were dependent from Denmark, but we were still together with the Swedes. And in 1905, Norway was an independent nation. Then we have Jonathan from Livingston in Texas says that you spoke of Viking books, but are there any films that you feel accurately represent the Vikings, including their culture and tradition? No, but there is a lot of films that I like. I actually like, for example, the Vikings series on HBO, quite famous, and it's not accurate at all. It's based on a myth of Ragnar Lodbrok, and it's made to look good in a movie. But what I think those film creators had managed is to bring out perhaps some of this more the idea of the Viking period, and some of the dreams, like Ragnar Lodbrok always look for the best land, the fattest soil. It's perhaps a detail in the film, but I think it's pretty accurate. So, and even though the costumes and the myth and is a lot of mixture and mistakes, I think a film like that, a series like that, can evoke interest for the history, and then you can enjoy the film and you can go back to a book and get more correct details and information about this very interesting period afterwards. Linda, did the Vikings sacrifice children? That is a hard one. I can't say exactly if they did, but there is I found in Denmark where they think it's some skeletons in a pit, and one of the interpretation of that is that there has been children offered children. It's not so nice to think about, really. We have Dean Relay. What do you think is the most innovative technology that the Viking developed? The ships, perhaps? Yes, the ships. There has been a lot of scholars saying that the ships was the reason for the whole Viking period. People living so close to the coast as the Scandinavian did and still does, they had boats for a long time. But at the beginning of the Viking period, perhaps a bit before that, they managed to build a keel stable enough to carry the weight of a mast and a huge sail. And with this sailing technique, it was easier for the Vikings to travel further and come back in shorter time. And with this relatively quick traveling and huge traveling activity. The Vikings met people and they brought ideas with them back home. It's like traveling today. When you go somewhere, you meet people and you get ideas, and when you come back, perhaps you're changed yourself. And then we have Miek from Montclair in the United States. We were in Newfoundland in the 1970s and came across Viking archaeology team. Are there still Viking stuff there? Yes, there has been an excavation at Lansow Meadow in Newfoundland. Ernestina and Helge Ingstad, they did an excavation there, and they found a Viking settlement. And this settlement was thoroughly excavated, so there shouldn't be any more items there. There are some remains in the earth though, and they have built up a nice museum and some rebuildings when they have rebuilt some of the buildings. You never know, of course. Perhaps we should try with the geo radar, but I don't think there are anything more there. And then we have Linda from the United States. Think that this was very enjoyable. Looking forward to the next Viking segment. Thank you, and thank you. And on the next Viking segment, we will actually go and visit an excavation when the museum always excavating a real Viking ship. It's the first excavation of a Viking ship in 100 years. So that's something special and something that you won't see too often. That's so exciting. And then we have Tobias from Portland in United States. He wants to know if the Vikings speak the same Norwegian language that you speak today. No, they didn't. They spoke Norse. I might perhaps been able to guess the meaning of a Viking, getting used to it slowly, but I couldn't speak to them. So it's not the same at all. And then I think this will be the last one for today because I like it. It's Jan from San Bruno in California. If there is one takeaway that you want people to know about the Vikings, what is it? Difficult? I think it has to be personal, that if there is one thing the Vikings did, they lived out their curiosity. They wanted to go somewhere. They wanted to see what was on the other side. They were genuinely curious on what other people thought and how they lived, and if there were anything they could learn from other cultures and other people. So if there is one thing about the Vikings, it will be that they were curious about other people, other cultures, and they wanted to learn. So that was the last one for today. And I hope you will join us next week, where we will visit this excavation and have a look how far they have come in excavating the new Viking ship. So welcome back and have a nice evening.